our role is not to understand genocide, but to stop it, to stand up, to say it's wrong in every way. But I can't resist wanting to understand what gives rise to such outrageous, absurd, hurtful behavior and vision. And I wonder if those of you who've looked genocide so closely in the face have anything to say about what should we know about genocide that will help us stop it?
It's a wonderful question, and it really is the question of the night. And I think what we're all trying to say is that the roots of this behavior are many, and the reasons and the factors are many. But the reason that it's allowed to happen, and that genocides occur and will occur and are occurring, is because we allow them to. Because we're ignorant of the truth, because we divert our eyes from the truth, and we fail to act. And so if there's any point to tonight, it's for all of us to recognize our role in genocide and to act.
Thank you. Thank you. Monique or Maria, any thoughts?
I think, as Tom said, we have to recognize our role, and everybody needs to understand that we should help everyone to live. No one is superior than another one, and the earth is for everybody. So we don't have to kill ourselves and help ourselves to live. Thank you.
And I think from my perspective, it's important to understand that genocide has multiple definitions. And a lot of people hesitate to call what happened here in Maine a genocide, but I don't know how you can call it anything else. But the practices continue. The practices of keeping the tribes down and oppressed still continue in this state. The tribes in Maine have never given up their sovereign identity as distinct tribal nations. But it seems that there's a constant threat and a constant challenge to who we are, to our identity as distinct tribal people in this state. So it's knowing that, it may not be so blatant, but it still is quite insidious.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, please.
I said thank you for great speeches tonight. My name is Dama Rugaba, the president of the Rwandese community here in Maine. And we celebrate commemoration of the genocide in Rwanda every year. And this April we invited Professor Burnham from Augusta. And he said, I was just trying to tap into the prior question. And he said that genocide is more driven by hatred, indifference, and greed. But that's not what I came here to say. I had questions, one for Maria and one for Tom. Tom, during the genocide in Rwanda, I know your organization you're working for is trying to stop future genocides. But what I've seen with politicians all across the world, they are more interested in interest rather than humanity. And to quote Bill Clinton back in 1994, he said, the United States has no friends, they have interest, when he was asked to intervene in Rwanda. What do you think will change politicians in the world, at least to look at people as the world interest as well? Because they're the ones that make these big companies, they're the ones that make the economy be the economy. And for Maria, I just wanted to ask you, what is your relationship with both the local governments and the federal governments as of today. Thank you.
So the relationship of the, I'm assuming you're meaning the Wabanaki tribes, not me personally. The Wabanaki tribes are federally recognized tribes. We do have a relationship with the federal government, but we do have a relationship with the state government, which is actually quite unique in this entire country. There's this pesky little thing called the Maine Indian Land Claims. And at one point in time, it was meant to be a means towards justice for the Penobscot and Passamaquoddy people who had suffered so much territorial loss. In the 1970s, they sued the state government for the loss of the territory, which amounted to about 2/3 of the state of Maine, and it really was quite a racially charged and hostile decade in which that land claim was being negotiated and settled. And so the relationship that we have with the state of Maine is defined in that document. Interestingly enough, that land claims document is completely devoid of any discourse on human rights. It was meant to settle a lawsuit for loss of lands, and it became more or less the holy canon of how to handle anything Indian that comes up in the state. It's being misused in a way it wasn't intended to be used. And so Penobscot and Passamaquoddy people have been fighting for decades to try to see amendments and changes to that Maine Indian land claims, which we consider to be another tool for further oppression of our people. And so we have a very contentious relationship with the state of Maine government. One of the purposes for the land claims, in addition to reacquiring land and seeking some restitution for having lived in abject poverty all these years after our territory was taken, one of the goals was just to have the state get off our backs so that we could live to be, the sovereign nation that we had always been. But that hasn't come to pass yet. So we're still working at defining our relationship with the state of Maine government. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Tom?
It's a great question about interests and the power of interest and self-interest. I'm an organizer from way back, and there's a maxim when you do organizing with particularly political people, and it goes, you can hope that a politician will do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, but you can count on a politician doing the right thing if he or she perceives it to be in his or her interest to do so. So we create the conditions in which it is the interest of a diplomat, a president, or a region, or a country to do the right thing. The fact that Burma is no longer in a total military lockdown and a military dictatorship, the fact that there has been some modest progress, the fact that Aung San Suu Kyi is no longer under house arrest but is in parliament is directly a result of organizing pressure and making it in the interests of the generals to begin to cede some of that brutality and open themselves up to democracy and a sliver of human rights. Frankly, I think that we were too quick in lifting the economic pressure and the diplomatic pressure, and we're seeing the effects of that. I feel it was a big mistake when that happened at the beginning of the Obama administration, quite frankly. So the principle of self-interest is very important that we think about and learn when we do our actions and our demonstrations and when we whatever it is to think about that. But I also want to say this, that there's another power beyond the power of self-interest. And it's the power of love and empathy and connection. And you need no more evidence than someone diving off a bridge into icy water to save a child who's fallen in, risk their lives, or run into a burning building, or endure hardship to help someone else, because it is the right thing to do, and because we connect to that person, and we have empathy, and we have love, and we care. So that's the other power that I think is so important for us to touch and mobilize in ourselves and others, as well as the principle of self-interest.
Hi. There's been a lot of discussion of overt genocide. And what I'm wanting to do is partly follow up on the question that happened before and talk about the more subtle but insidious forms, things that are happening in tribal communities where there's, the tar sands with fracking. And also, I was going to hope that Maria would, I know there are opportunities in the lobby to find out how to help, but just talking about the threats that the river faces currently.
Thank you. Yes, one of the issues that Penobscot Nation is facing right now, which is most prevalent for us, is the threat of further territorial loss. In August of 2012, the Penobscot Chief and Council received a letter from a department in state government basically redefining their understanding of the scope of our reservation. The scope of our reservation was delineated in a treaty in 1818. And for some reason in 2012, the state of Maine wanted to redefine that. And what the letter basically said was that although your tribal nation consists of 200 plus islands in the Penobscot River, that your reservation doesn't include the water. So for a tribe that's been living in that watershed for thousands of years, that was just a ludicrous assertion that we could not agree with. And the letter basically said, do you agree or disagree? And if you disagree, we'll see you in court. So the Penobscot Nation knew that they were in for a fight. They knew we never get a fair trial in a state of Maine court. And so they decided to move on the offensive and asked to place this case in a federal court where it's now at. And the case has received very little attention in Maine. Most places where I go to talk, and I mention this Penobscot River case, they know nothing about it. And so, it begs me to want to ask the question, on whose behalf is this case being carried out? One of our greatest fears is that they're looking to claim the river so that they can industrialize our homelands. And we have approached the Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Justice, who has come in to this case as an intervener on the side of the Penobscots, who do see this as another territorial taken by the state of Maine government. But unfortunately, there's also been about 14 to 15 other interveners who have entered the case. And these are towns and polluting industries up and down the river who have been convinced to join in, to ask the judge to declare that the Penobscot Nation, an ancient tribe of people living in the Penobscot River watershed, that their reservation doesn't include the water. So it feels very, very hostile to me. One of the town that I live in, Orono, is a town that's an intervener in this case. And I don't know where we'll see some resolution to it. It's going to be a long, drawn-out case. And it's costing hundreds and thousands of dollars, taxpayer dollars. And for what?
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Here?
Yeah.
The great genocides in the first half of the 20th century were the Nazi Holocaust, the Soviet killing of tens of millions, and in China. Since then, the nation most largely responsible for genocides and mass killing is the United States of America. In Guatemala, El Salvador, East Timor, Iraq, the enabling of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, the dispossession of 10 million or more in Mexico through NAFTA. All of these may not qualify as genocide, but there's a lot of blood on our hands in the last 65 years. Would you comment on how that happens if all of the conditions that define genocide don't apply here?
Well, I think all of those things happen, and there are many very dark chapters of our history and our present that begs that kind of question. And I think whether it's genocide or not, whether it's an assault on a people, whether it's the use of mass violence, whatever the case may be, I think that what we demand, what is so critically important, is for people like the people in this room to identify it as such, to call it as such, and to organize in every way conceivable to stop it.
You have the distinction of being the final question of the evening.
I have to make a slight comment, which is I appreciate so very much your willingness to come here and to speak the truth, all of the three of you, and also to hear from other people. It's a great event that has been organized here, and I appreciate that. I have a question about political will. If we acknowledge that political will is one way to leverage change, and in listening to what the different panelists have said about how progress in one area is viewed as taking away from someone else, my question is about that. How do we upend that equation? Because political will is driven so much, it seems, by people who think about it that way. If it's something for you, then it's not something for me. In response to what do we do here in ME?
Thank you.
It seems to me that we've long forgotten that it's the people that really drive the political process. And perhaps we've become so complacent over the years that we've forgotten that. One thing that I'm finding with Penobscot Nation in their current circumstance is that we have thousands and thousands of allies. Allies who have the same fears as we do about industrializing this state, and fears about the environmental catastrophes that may be pending. And so I think more and more, at least from my perspective, we're beginning to identify our common grounds and beginning to find ways to organize. We held an event at Penobscot Nation, and over 300 allies came to support our Justice for the River event and raised thousands of dollars to help fight the state government in this case. And so I feel that that there's a lot of grassroots activism and there's a lot of ally building that has been happening, and that we're no longer fighting this battle alone, but that it's been a long time creating this mess. It's going to take a long time to clean it up.
And it's not just a commerce of interests, winning and losing. I gain, you get something taken away from you. There's something else here, and the something else is a value that transcends this and is something other than strictly the commerce of interest. It's the values that we're reflecting here, and the values that are able to live and breathe through this kind of coalition work and organizing work, in which someone says, no, this is not right, we will not allow this to continue to happen because it violates a principle and a value that is important to us. And we are going to make those principles and values just as powerful of a currency in these debates as these narrow self-interests. And that, I think, is the key to our success.
Thank you. Final voice. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Noelia. I'm a student here at USM, and thank you for doing this. I think it's great. So, my family is from South Sudan, and there is a genocide going on in South Sudan right now. And my question is, like, as a student, I feel like I'm an activist. I just sometimes find myself confused in, like, who to talk to. I mean, I do whatever I can on Facebook, and I talk to whoever I can talk to bring awareness to what's going on in South Sudan right now. And so my question is, like, is there anything in the government, like, is there anything in the U.S. The Senate in Maine that has relations with, like, refugee families, or refugee families to help them with the genocide? No, that doesn't make sense. Sorry. Basically, what I'm asking is there any programs that can help bring awareness in Maine, like in the state level?
Well, you're helping right now, number one. And number two, you're right. There's a great catastrophe happening, as you know, in South Sudan. And with the end of the rainy season and the beginning of the fighting season, there is great danger of a significant loss of life right now in South Sudan. And there are discussions, there are negotiations, but it's still not clear that the various governments, including our government, will hold the parties fully accountable for their actions. And that's going to be the key. We have, let me just give you an example of just how important your question is. When the fighting broke out months ago, and people began to die, and our government was trying to determine the best position, I called the State Department and I asked our special envoy, I says, well, what do the people from South Sudan living here, what do they say? Because they have relatives and family and friends who are there, and they're in communication back and forth. There's lots of information that they have. In fact, there's lots of information they can convey. In fact, a lot of the sustenance going to some of those families in South Sudan that are in the middle of all this come from families who are here. Tell me what they've said to you, and what kind of information you've received from them, and what kind of information you've been able to convey through them. And they had never met with one member of the community of South Sudan to talk about this, to talk about what was going on and what we could do about it. And so we convened a session with the State Department and the special envoy of people from South Sudan, leaders of various communities that were involved in various aspects of this, to begin to speak and talk and engage to help shape this policy. The second thing we've done, and this is something that I hope you and others will participate in, is engaging the Congress through legislation that pushes the United States to make this a high priority and to hold leaders accountable. And just one last note: when African leaders came to the nation's capital a few months ago for the summit, the African summit, we had a major campaign to have this be put on the agenda and be put right front and center of that summit. And in fact, it was largely because of people from South Sudan.
Thank you. I hope you'll join me in thanking once again our speakers, our performers, and so many people who put so much effort into making this possible. So please, if you will, join me in that.